The Honky Tonk Man was announced as the latest inductee into the WWE Hall of Fame class of 2019. He joins DX so far as the only two official acts announced for the Hall of Fame. Jimmy Hart would make sense, I would think, to be his inductor, but he's going in separately for a second time as part of a planned Hart Foundation induction this year. I guess that's a little spoiler, but anyway, they can't. So I guess they could have him do it, but that would be kind of weird. And they can't have Peggy Sue do it because she's dead, unfortunately. Sherry is no longer with us. And they can't have Rockabilly do it because he's going into the Hall of Fame this year also, as part of the DX induction. Honky and Rockabilly, part of the same Hall of Fame class. What a world. What a world we live in. I guess Greg Valentine would be the only... I hear Greg Valentine is not all that busy these days. I don't know how much of a public speaker he is. I don't know how good of an induction speech he would give. I actually see rumors that WWE might possibly be doing away with inductors. I don't know. I think that comes from Sean Waltman on his podcast. And obviously Sean Waltman is pretty well connected to certain people inside WWE. That doesn't mean that it's true. It doesn't mean that that's the final decision that's going to be made. I guess I would be okay with that. Sometimes these inductors do wax a little too eloquently. They do go on for a little long. I mean, look, they put these great video packages together, right, for these guys. So realistically, you don't need somebody to induct you into the Hall of Fame. You could throw it to a video package and then throw it right back to Jerry Lawler, who's the host of this thing usually. And he could be the one to just introduce the person and have them come out on stage. That would save a lot of time. I can't say I'm against the idea. Jerry Lawler, speaking of which, it's going to be very interesting to watch him introduce Honky on there, given all the things that Honky has said about him over the years. My understanding, though, is that they buried the hatchet a number of years ago. I mean, probably in each other's back, but things may be cool now between the two of them. I don't know. They are actually first cousins. Their mothers were sisters. So that is the family relation. You heard the audio I played at the top of the podcast from that shoot interview that Honky did years ago with Sean Oliver. He called the Hall of Fame bullshit and a joke. It was only bullshit and a joke when he felt that it wasn't worth his while. And it would have hurt his ability to take bookings because of some of the restrictions that WWE puts on these people when they sign the deal. WWE has offered him at least one other time. They have offered him a spot in the Hall of Fame. The first time I think was about a decade ago. They might have offered it to him again around 2013, and he turned him down. He said no. And now that I guess he's not wrestling as much, if at all these days, and he's starting to settle down a little bit, I guess now he feels now it's time. Now it's time to get my name out there again and maybe put the jumpsuit on and be the Honky Tonk Man. I want to go through this guy's career here because there's just a lot of really interesting stories when you really look at what he did, especially once he came to WWE and some of the backstage stories and the urban legends over the years. It actually really is kind of interesting. He was doing the Elvis gimmick up in Stampede before he ever came to WWE. So it wasn't a Vince McMahon creation. Vince liked it, and he brought him in, just like with Hogan and a lot of those guys, Hulkamania and Hogan. That existed before he ever came to work for Vince McMahon. Vince liked it. He saw that he could take that and make it an even bigger thing, and so he brought those guys in. Those were not original creations of like The Undertaker was an original creation of Vince McMahon. But Honky was doing the Elvis thing long before he ever came in, but he brought, and by the way, on that, as far as Honky doing things before he came to WWE, you want to see something really weird? Go dig up those videos of him, those old videos as one half of the Blonde Bombers back in Memphis in the 70s. He looks like a completely different person. It's really weird to see him with the blonde hair just being anything other than the Honky Tonk Man. But the original plan when he came into WWE was not for him to be a heel. He was supposed to be a friend of Hulk Hogan's. That was supposed to make him a made man, right? His very first appearance, the Junkyard Dog introduced him to the crowd. This was after the tag team match with JYD and George the Animal Steele. I think they had just won. And JYD gets on the mic and he introduces this guy, the Honky Tonk Man. And when you watch the video, he comes out in the jumpsuit, and the reaction was not exactly what Vince McMahon had probably hoped for. Even on his very first night, reaction was lukewarm at best. But Vince was determined to get this guy over. Honky on the interview, later on, Hulk Hogan would do inset interviews during Honky Tonk Man's matches, praising him and talking this guy up. It didn't matter how many times Hogan endorsed him. Nothing worked. And so Vince decided, we're going to have a vote of confidence for the Honky Tonk Man. And they asked the fans to send in cards and letters to a P.O. box address in support of the Honky Tonk Man. And when they read the results later on, more people disliked Honky than liked him. Obviously, by then they had already made the decision that this isn't working. We have to go in a different direction, because they could have just worked the results of the poll. But they were honest. I'm sure the results reflected what they said on television, which is that most people probably just didn't like this guy. Art imitates life, I guess. And that was the catalyst for Honky to go turn on the fans and become the hated heel that everybody remembers him being. If this was the Vince McMahon of today, he'd have given the Honky Tonk Man 5 straight WrestleMania main events as a babyface, and we'd have Michael Cole on television every week telling us, well, the fans just like to have fun. They boo the people they like and they cheer the people they hate. But that's the story that's always been told. That Vince really did think this guy was going to get over as a babyface, and when he saw the crowd reactions to him, they decided to just go with it and turn him heel. I do sometimes wonder if that was the plan all along, was just for him to be the heel, and the whole thing was just set up that way on purpose. I mean, if so, I thought what they did then was a brilliant way of turning him. But I've heard Bruce Pritchard say that Vince really did see Honky as a babyface. There was no great plan here. He really thought this guy was going to be cheered. And Vince did the same thing with Hillbilly Jim. He associated Hillbilly Jim with Hulk Hogan when he first debuted. Hogan was I'm going to train this guy to become a wrestler. And it worked. And Hillbilly was a babyface for the rest of his career. And now he's a Hall of Famer, too. But with Honky Tonk Man, the fans just never bought into it. But he is best known, of course, and we're going to hear this 1,000 times the night of the Hall of Fame, for calling himself the greatest Intercontinental Champion of all time, because he still, to this day, holds the record for the longest IC title run, 454 days. What is that, 16 weeks or something? Not 16, 64. I think it's 64 total weeks as Intercontinental Champion from June of 87 through August of 88. And there is an interesting story behind that. Ricky Steamboat, he had just beaten Randy Savage to win the title of WrestleMania 3. Classic match, everybody knows it. It gets talked about ad nauseum. Steamboat was going to be one of Vince's top babyfaces. He was going to be the champion for a very long time. A few weeks later, Steamboat goes to Vince McMahon and he asks him for a few weeks off to be at home with his wife. She was due to give birth to their first son. Might be their only son, but she was having a baby soon, and he wanted some time off to be with her. And that did not sit well with Vince McMahon, because here he had just gifted him the Intercontinental Championship, right? He had just booked him to win this big match at WrestleMania. The IC title, believe it or not, used to be a pretty big deal. It certainly doesn't feel that way now, but it used to be. I mean, it really was the second biggest title in the entire company. People called it the workhorse title because you could put that on in main events on some shows. They could headline shows with the Intercontinental Championship match, in the main event. And the schedule they had those guys on back then was inhuman. It's no wonder they were all pilled up and drinking and doing things, because imagine working in those rings. I was just talking about that last week, how those rings felt like concrete. Imagine working in those rings on the road as many times as they were back then, going as hard as they were. Very little oversight. It's not like it is today. But, Steamboat was put in that role. He had a certain responsibility, and Vince was not happy about this. Now you want to take time off? I can't have you taking time off. I just put the belt on you. So he made the decision to take the title off of Steamboat. The belief has always been that Butch Reed was going to win the championship, and he was going to be the man to beat Steamboat. As the legend has it, he no-showed the Superstars taping where he was going to win it, or he showed up late. They needed a replacement. Vince and Hogan are having a conversation in the hallway when Hogan looks and he spots Honky Tonk Man walking by. And he points at him and he says, "What about him, brother?" And the rest is history. If you watch the post-match celebration in the heel locker room after Honky won the belt, Butch Reed is there. He's right there in the background. So either he showed up late or the story is complete bullshit. But Reed himself did a shoot interview last year, and he admitted that he did no-show a whole bunch of tapings. He just was, generally burned out. I was just telling you about the schedule, right? It's not hard to imagine why. He was burned out, and he admits that he would no-show some tapings from time to time. He says that's what cost him the chance to be the Intercontinental Champion. So there you go. That really is the best version of events, I guess. He confirmed it himself. Honky Tonk Man lucked into the biggest break of his career. Not only did he need Butch Reed to not be there when he was supposed to be, he had to be walking down the hallway at the exact right moment. The stars had to align perfectly for this guy to get the biggest break of his career. Now, that being said, he was lucky, but he was a heat magnet. People hated this guy's guts. You can mock the gimmick all you want to. And a lot of people do, but a lot of the live events that he headlined back then, again, they'd have their A crew, they'd have their B crew, and sometimes they even had a C crew, and they would run 3 different cities on one night. The shows that he headlined a lot of times would sell out because people desperately wanted to see him lose. They wanted to see this guy get his ass kicked, and they would pay money to see it. My very first live wrestling show was the post-Christmas show at Madison Square Garden back in 1987. The only thing I remember from that night is the main event. And the main event was Macho Man Randy Savage against the Honky Tonk Man for the Intercontinental Championship with Jimmy Hart suspended above the ring in a shark cage. That was the main event on the show that night. And there were a lot of nights like that. Now, his run was almost cut short early in '88. We wouldn't be having this whole Hall of Fame discussion about this guy being the greatest Intercontinental Champion of all time had Vince McMahon gotten his way early in '88. And that's another story that has grown in legend over the years, and there's some slightly different versions of events, and it's all a matter of who you choose to believe. I would love one day for Vince McMahon to write a book, or do a shoot interview on his own network, because it would do gangbuster numbers. I mean, why outsource it to RF Video or Conrad fucking Thompson? Just do it yourself. You have your own network. I know Vince was already on the Stone Cold podcast. I'm not talking about the Stone Cold podcast. I'm talking about like an all-out 3-hour-long fan Q&A submitted shoot interview with Vince McMahon. I would love that if I trusted that he would actually tell the truth. And I have absolutely no faith whatsoever that A, he would be able to tell the truth, or B, he would remember most of this shit in the first place. And that sucks, because he would be the one to answer all of these questions. But as the story goes, Vince McMahon wanted the Honky Tonk Man to drop the title to Randy Savage on their live main event special. This was in February of '88, this big special on NBC, right? This was the same show where Hulk Hogan dropped the title to Andre the Giant. Hogan had been the champion for 4 years, and it was a terrible match, as most of their matches were from, 87 on. I mean, Hogan and Andre had some decent matches, or, like 1980, even late 70s, they may have had a few matches. Their matches from 87 on, as far as actual matches go, were freaking dog shit. Andre couldn't do much. He just physically was not able to do much at that point. And so that was the night that Andre won the championship, the big evil Twin Hebner referee angle and all that. And that set up the tournament for WrestleMania 4 when the title was held up, when Andre gave it up to give the belt to Ted DiBiase, and they said, no, you can't do that. So they put this tournament together for WrestleMania because Hogan was going to go off to go film No Holds Barred. And the belief is that Ted DiBiase was going to win that tournament, and he was going to get a heel run as the WWF champion. And that certainly is the story that DiBiase still tells to this day in all the interviews that he's ever done. And Honky Tonk Man even said that for a while he had heat with DiBiase because of it. Reason being, Why would DiBiase hate the Honky Tonk Man? Well, first of all, why wouldn't somebody hate the Honky Tonk Man? But in his case, Honky refused to drop the IC belt to Randy Savage. Because he knew, he was smart, he knew that if he dropped that championship, that was it. He was done for. The biggest run of his career would be over. That was his ceiling. He could not go any higher than that. And he was also sensitive to losing on live television like that. I guess maybe he thought it would hurt his value if he lost on TV, if he wanted to go work for Crockett. In fact, one version of the story has it that his contract was coming up and he flat out threatened to jump to Crockett if they made him lose that title. Honky's story is that he was working without a contract. This is his story. He was working on a handshake deal with Vince McMahon, which I find impossible to believe, especially considering he was the second biggest champion in the company. You're going to tell me that you're working on a handshake deal even back then? Back then, there were no contracts. I've heard him say that too. He's full of shit. He knew he was dead in the water the minute he dropped that title, so he refused to lose. Here they are now. They're getting ready to go on live. So they had Randy Savage win the match by countout instead. Savage was furious. And instead, they decided to make Savage the WWF champion by having him win the tournament at WrestleMania. That's one hell of a consolation prize for the Macho Man, and a kick in the balls if you're the $1 Million Man. Although the next year, to make up for it, they made a belt just for him, right? The $1 Million, if you're not going to win the world title, we'll just make you your own title. And so they made the $1 Million belt for him, and he parlayed that into lots of success. Even years later, the $1 Million belt was still on WWF television. But the story has been pretty consistent now for years of Honky refusing, DiBiase being screwed out of the world title. It's just, the more I think about it, it's hard for me to think the way that Mega Power story was set up, that the plan all along wasn't for Savage to win the title. It was the perfect long-term story. If you think about it, they become friends, right? Late 87. Savage wins the title, early 88. And then when Hogan comes back, Savage grows jealous, disillusioned. Your eyes, they lust for Elizabeth, right? The whole deal. And it leads to a match. It leads to a split and then a match at WrestleMania 5. That plus the idea that they were going to have the heel win the championship at the end of WrestleMania just wasn't something they did back then. I mean, they only had 3 WrestleManias under their belt at the time, but just something they didn't do. But DiBiase is adamant that that's what happened. That's how it all played out. As far as who he would have feuded with had Savage won the IC title, if DiBiase won the WWF title, Hogan's gone, right, for a few months. Who does he feud with? Hogan's gone. Savage has the IC. In his book, Hacksaw Jim Duggan claimed that had it not been for that traffic bust in 86 with the Iron Sheik, he thinks that he would have become WWF champion, Intercontinental champion, or tag team champion. I cannot see Jim Duggan holding the world title, but the idea that maybe he could have been the one to feud with DiBiase for the world title through part of 88, it really isn't that far-fetched when you really think about it. The company had Duggan working with Andre for a while. They wouldn't do that with just anybody. Duggan and DiBiase, they had a history together going back to their days in Mid-South. They had some wars down there in Mid-South. If Duggan wasn't booked like a complete buffoon, like a cartoon character, I don't think it's far-fetched to think that he could have been a placeholder contender until the summer before DiBiase would have just dropped the belt back to Hulk Hogan. But anyway, Honky Tonk Man. Instead, he dropped the championship to the Ultimate Warrior in 30 seconds at SummerSlam. He did an interview with Wrestling Inc. last year where Honky said that he had total creative control over that match and that the entire thing was his idea. He put the whole thing together. That's what he said anyway. He was prescient about one thing. When he lost that Intercontinental title, he was worried that he would slide right back down the card, and that's exactly what happened. They paired him up with Greg Valentine for a run. They had that run as Rhythm and Blues. But Not long after that, he was gone from the company, back on the independent scene. When Hulk Hogan joined WCW in '94, Jimmy Hart, got Honky a job with WCW. He lasted all of 3 months. He had 2 matches with Johnny B. Bad for the television title, both of which sucked. And then he left before their big blow-off was going to be at Starrcade. They were going to have their 3rd match, probably their final match. I'm sure, obviously, Bad was going to win, and Honky did not want to do the job. Eric Bischoff hated him so much. He hated him. He hated dealing with him so much that in his book, he said that his favorite firing of anyone that he has ever fired in his career was the Honky Tonk Man. And then years later, when Bischoff was in TNA, and Honky was out there claiming, hey, you know, I'm in negotiations, I'm very close to signing a deal with TNA, Bischoff said that he would rather drive a rusty ice pick through his eye than ever have to work another day with that man. I take it Honky will not be listing Eric Bischoff as a reference on his resume. Honky did admit later, by the way, that he was full of shit. Not the first time he's been full of shit. There were never any negotiations with TNA. His return in '97, he came back as a commentator. I don't know why. But they brought him back for a while as a commentator, and they were going to bring him back as a manager, too. They had this whole, I'm searching for my protege, and the big payoff was Billy Gunn was his protege and rebranded as Rockabilly. And that went about as well as you would have expected it to. He did come back and had a memorable cameo, a fun cameo in the Royal Rumble match in 2001. I will say that was fun. He came out, he didn't overstay his welcome, he was playing a song, Kane took the guitar, smashed it over his head, threw him out of the ring. Great cameo. Look, Honky Tonk Man can be very outspoken. He gives a very entertaining shoot interview. I've seen plenty of clips from Honky Tonk Man shoot interviews, and he can be a very charming, very entertaining guy in that kind of setting. But boy, the things that this guy has said, he comes across like a major league asshole. Just a major league asshole, this guy. And apparently, buying the rights to and trademarking other people's names and gimmicks, or again, trying to anyway, which is quite the shrewd business move, I will say, for him to swoop in and do that sort of thing and try to make money off other people's gimmicks while they're still out there with those gimmicks. I know he had heat with Jake Roberts and Roddy Piper for a while over that. Tried to get their names. And when Jake called him out on it, on his bullshit, trying to, again, get the rights to his name and all that, Honky's response was to say that, well, I decided not to trademark Jake's name because I didn't think he would live much longer, so it wouldn't have been worth the investment. What a stand-up guy. Maybe the only time that Dynamite Kid ever came across as likable to me in any of these backstage stories that you've heard about him over the years, and I think he talked about it in his book, Bret Hart talked about it in his book, is when he supposedly smacked the shit out of the Honky Tonk Man for disrespecting Harley Race. And shout out to Harley Race. We found out this week that he has lung cancer. He claims it's not chronic. It was Ric Flair. He was doing some Q&A event, I think, with Hulk Hogan. And he just casually let it slip. Oh, by the way, Harley Race, he's got terminal lung cancer. It's like, did he even want that out there publicly? Like, what are you doing, dude? And then Harley had to put a statement out, or his family did, saying it is true. He is dealing with lung cancer, but it's not terminal. And again, now I don't know if they're just saying that to cover up for it, or if, Ric Flair got his lines crossed and he was wrong. But, I mean, I heard that and I just thought, boy, I've not heard anything about Harley Race having terminal lung cancer. And I'm sure that if that's something he and his family wanted out there, they would have announced it on their own. And there's Ric Flair just casually throwing it out there. Like, huh. But anyway, shout out to Harley Race. Hopefully he's doing well. But this story was that Harley had surgery to have part of his intestine removed, and Honky made a joke about him not having any guts anymore. He was basically, making fun of him. And so Dynamite stood up, and he backhanded Honky right out of his chair. Of course, Honky denies it. He said, well, Dynamite, he just yelled at me. He didn't physically assault me. He just yelled at me. I would have paid money to see the Dynamite Kid smack the shit out of the Honky Tonk Man. But he has his place in history. He drew well during his run as champion. I have no issue with him being acknowledged in the Hall of Fame. I don't doubt that he'll give an entertaining Hall of Fame speech. He'll probably be kissing a lot of ass that he was ripping for many years, but that's what happens in these situations. You kiss and make up. And look, maybe he'll even get a WrestleMania segment, or, well, I mean, they always have the Hall of Famers out there, but maybe on Raw the next night after WrestleMania, he'll have a segment with Elias, and they'll do something with the two of them. I would actually be surprised, frankly, if it doesn't happen.